Take two. Mio on MMA podcast. Your host, Mio. Fan of MMA for 20 years. Practitioner for about 19. Usual spiel here. And we've got the final UFC card of 2022. And it's not bad. It's pretty good actually. I want to be pretty fair to it, to be honest, because we'll be back on January 14th. So actually we have a long break here. It's a pretty good card. Every fight on the card has interesting levels, even if some of them define to sort of a singular point of definition for me. It's still pretty interesting. And I'm really looking forward to Arman Tsarukyan versus Damir Ismagulov. I'm fairly interested in Cannonier, Sean Strickland. And you've also got Alex Caceres, who I always enjoy watching fight and hate breaking down the fight. And I'm also looking forward to Drew Dober versus Bobby Green. And I'm always a big fan of Michael Oleksiejczuk. He's on the card. Said Nurmagomedov versus Saud Kakhramonov on the card. Mahashete, interesting prospect, on the card. Manel Kape versus David Dvorak. Really weird spot on the card. But it's on the card. It's interesting. And I have a little bit of an interest in Rinat Fakhretdinov. Now, this card also plagued by some injuries. We were supposed to have Bruno Silva versus Albert Duraev. That's not on the card. We were supposed to have a number of interesting fights for Amir Albazi, with Brandon Royval and Alex Perez, both linked to the fight. Both pulled out. And now we have Alessandro Costa, which is still an okay fight. I actually rather like Costa, but it definitely takes some of the sting off of that fight. Before we get into the fights, I do have three things I want to talk about. It looks like Dalcin Lungiambula has been cut by the UFC. He's no longer in the ranking pool that the UFC does for their rankings. This generally has meant that someone's heading out the door. And it not surprising. He's lost 3 or 4 in a row. Can't remember which. So obviously he's been having a rough time. And then we have the Matt Brown thoughts on judging. And I really think you guys should go and check out the Writer and the Fighter. That's Damon Martin and Matt Brown's podcast. If you like mine, you'll like theirs because it's better. It's got a bigger audience. It's got more connections and so on. I'm still trying to become better here. And they brought up the whole, it's a big deal when a judge gets a fight wrong because you're taking half of the paycheck away from a fighter. That's a big financial moment. We talk about fighter pay. We talk about fighter finances for a long time. And that's something that probably isn't discussed enough. And they had an idea of what if we put the camera on the judges? That, like a referee, we know what Douglas Crosby looks like. Because Matt Brown brought up, he's not even sure what some of the judges who have scored fights poorly against him even look like. And that's an excellent point. They talked about it as a feature of open scoring. And I've said it before. I don't think open scoring fixes anything. I've said this a couple of times. Because at the end of the day, the problem is essentially that there is no judging accountability. There is nothing that says Douglas Crosby, for example, isn't judging a Bellator main event in Connecticut, flying across the country less than 24 hours later to do a co-main event in Nevada. That's the general problem. That there is that a judge like Douglas Crosby, who is known to be bad, is still getting that booking. That he is still getting that. That there is no incentive for him to get it right because he's being booked on the biggest cards of the month and in the biggest fights on those cards, while having a long, long history going back to like BJ Penn, Frankie Edgar 1, of being a pretty terrible judge. And honestly, even longer than that. There was a period where he apparently was not booked from about 2014 all the way through Bob Bennett's term as Nevada State Athletic Commissioner, which probably just means that he wasn't in with Bob Bennett. That the connection-based politics that realistically are why judges get big fights didn't favor him at the time. Also, if you have not checked out the audio recordings of Doug Crosby's interviews with Chael Sonnen, oh my lord, I don't generally listen to Chael Sonnen's show, but it got posted. I went in there, listened to 2 episodes of him where he admits to scoring based on who the promotion wants to win at times, thus completely destroying any idea that he's like, watching the fight, but that he also is just a super weird dude. And I have nothing against weird people. I am very weird myself. But he is bizarre to the point where I don't think he's all there. And like you have a deteriorous mental state of mind, an admission that he is corrupt, not so much in like in the traditional corruption sense, but that he is judging based on non-fight aspects. And you can also see this with I think it was Sherdog who had an interview with Jeff Mullen after he stopped judging, where he talked about his judging criteria not remotely being the judging criteria that is stated to the fighters. And these are like the most seasoned, most high-profile judges in the sport. The ones training other people to judge. It's that's the problem. That's the problem. It's not the idea of bringing in a half-point system. It's not the idea of open judging. It's not the idea of reevaluating the scoring criteria. Although these are all possibly good ideas, it just does not matter until the core problem is addressed. And then Sean O'Malley has a weird one where he wants Aljo and Henry Cejudo to fight. I didn't write down the months. I think he said March. So that he could fight them in May. Or 2 months later, whatever it was. And that's just not how it works, homie. Like if O'Malley wanted the title shot against Aljo and he was going to speak up about it, he probably has a case. Like he did beat Peter Yan, regardless of what your thoughts on the Peter Yan fight was. He is in position to challenge for the title. And they are kind of overstepping him for Henry, but like you don't get to. I mean, the UFC may still give him that shot, but like if the UFC was going to give you the shot, they wouldn't be talking about a Cejudo title shot. They would have put it in. They would have written it down, writ large, promoted it. O'Malley, Sterling, UFC bantamweight title. That's where we would be. Let's get to the fights. Jared Cannonier versus Sean Strickland. Interesting fight in the sense that people on social media have like 2 really, really strong takes. That Cannonier is just going to waste Strickland, or that Strickland is going to do Strickland things. And I think the answer is really somewhere in between. Because Jared Cannonier is not Alex Bahia. No one is. Alex Bahia is a freak of finishing knockout nature. So the fact that Sean Strickland got wasted by him, as much as it confirmed a lot of the thoughts that we have, that there are defensive openings for him, that his form as a striker is pretty terrible, that if you deny him a reach advantage, which Cannonier has 1.2 or 1.5 inches of reach in this fight, he is very vulnerable to getting hit. And I will say this, I also really, really dislike Strickland. I bring that up at the beginning, not as a crapping on Strickland moment, but to be clear that when I get around to picking Jared Cannonier here, you should keep that in mind if you're using this for betting. Because I've always said this. As much as I think I actually have a really good track record with Sean Strickland fights, I didn't go back and watch the episode after episode after episode, but I can't recall getting a fight of his wrong. I honestly can't. I look at his record, and I feel like all of these wins, be it against Jack Hermansson, Uriah Hall, maybe Hall. I might have picked Hall. But like Yako, Brendan Allen, Jack Marshman, Nordin Taleb, these are all fights I would have picked him in. And the only time I really picked against him that I can recall in recent memory is the Peja fight, which he did lose. But at the same time, I do really dislike him because he does the serial killer gimmick. He does the Jeremy Stevens is doing it too. Like the I would rape a man in prison. I would be in jail if not for MMA. I so desperately want to drink the blood of my opponents while having like a really kind of dull slap jab style of fighting. I'm not hating on the style. It works and it suits his frame and it suits his physicality. But the idea that he is like this out of control madman and that's why you can't judge him for what he says outside of the cage, but fights in such a controlled manner inside the cage it's bullshit. It's like, congratulations, your greatest source of self-control comes in the moment where adrenaline is pumping and destroying your ability to make rational, objective decisions, and where most fighters make their worst decisions in the cage is where you are the most normal human being. Like, that's a problem. I don't buy it. I think it's like why Ian Gary being like a Conor McGregor clone comes off so poorly. I just don't buy it. I don't think it's true. There's nothing genuine to it. Anyways, get back to the fight. So what does Cannonier have to do? Cannonier has to find a way to neutralize the jab that Sean Strickland does, but he has those tools. He can go to the body. He has his own jab. He has his ability to throw combination. He has his ability to throw big power. So he has all of those tools. But he is still going to have to deal with the volume, the activity level of Strickland, the persistency of Strickland, the hard-nosed nature of Strickland. I don't think he's going to go out there and waste him. But I do believe he is going to TKO him. Because I think that Cannonier is a fighter that feeds off of confidence. And every fighter does. But like in a very profound way, feeds off of confidence. And having seen Sean Strickland go out there and get knocked out by Alex Peja, and knowing that Cannonier went 5 rounds with Israel Adesanya, and Israel Adesanya did have answers for Alex Peja, is going to feed into a positive mind space for Cannonier. And when he has a positive mind space, he does very, very well. And that's why I'm taking Cannonier by TKO. The odds favor Strickland. He's a minus 110 to minus 118 favorite as we speak, with Cannonier at minus 105 to minus 111 on the flip side of the coin. So it's a pick 'em fight. It's kind of ironic for a fight that has such a strong take one way or the other on social media. The betting odds are actually meeting basically dead in the middle. This is the closest spread on the entire card. Now, I will say that if Strickland decides to emphasize his grappling, because his grappling is quite good. If he decides to emphasize his grappling, go for takedowns, and he can get them, that is a pathway to victory for Sean Strickland. Because Cannonier, not easy to submit or anything like that, but his ground game is stall heavy. It's a lot of trying to get a stand up, and Strickland probably from top position can get a ton of work done. But it has been a while since he made that a thing. Like I said the same thing with the Alex Peja fight, but at the same time, I thought that Strickland would stand and bang with him. And sure enough, he went out there with a glory, world-class kickboxer and kickboxed and got knocked out. This will take longer, but I think it's the same. I think it's the same general dynamic. Arman Tsarukyan versus Damir Ismagulov. Big fan of both of these guys. Big fan. Obviously, Damir has the reach and the height advantage. Nothing new from Arman because Arman is 5'7", has a pretty long reach for a guy who's 5'7", but he's 5'7" at lightweight. That is very short. My initial thought was to think to myself, well, Damir has the game that Mateusz Gamrot and Makhachev brought to Tsarukyan and beat him with it. But then my brain is like, in both of those cases, those guys had to do a lot to ground Tsarukyan. And Ismagulov is a lower end athlete than either of those guys, and honestly is a worse wrestler than either of those guys. And his takedown accuracy is something like 28%. It's slightly better than 1 for 4. I don't think that he can go out there and he can just put a wrestling pace on. Now, granted, I think his striking game is more nuancedly embedded into his wrestling game. Like, they fit better together than anything Gamrot does and anything that Makhachev at that time did. I think Makhachev has gotten notably better at this as time has gone on. But Ismagulov is really that total package. But at the same time, so is OAM to a certain degree. More just a takedown threat. And then you saw him beat Alvarez. I'm talking about Tsarukyan. Alvarez, Giagos, Frivola, all of whom lack notice. So, like, Ismagulov does represent a higher level than we have seen Arman Tsarukyan beat, while representing a style that has beaten Tsarukyan, but without the high side of those two guys. I'm going with Tsarukyan by decision because you look at the Guram Kutaladze fight, which a lot of people scored for Kutaladze against Ismagulov. And this is kind of feels like a very similar one. Like, don't get me wrong, Tsarukyan doesn't have the height of Kutaladze, but he has the power. He has the fundamental base strength that allowed Kutaladze to define a lot of exchanges with Ismagulov. Tsarukyan has that power. He has that strength. He has the ability to highlight the fact that it just seems like Ismagulov doesn't hit that hard. He's a guy who hasn't had a finish since 2017. And has been pretty active during that time period. It's not like he has like 5 fights in that time period. He's been pretty active. And I think if you can't present a overwhelming physical aspect and finish threat to Tsarukyan, you are going to lose. So Tsarukyan by decision. I also do love Tsarukyan's absolute roasting of Michael Chandler, which I had to get through translator, obviously, because he's not talking English. But he's just like casually roasting him. He goes in a little bit on Charles Oliveira too. I thought it was a little harsh. Not even just because I'm a Charles Oliveira fan, but just because he kind of compared him to like ending up like Tony Ferguson. I don't think anyone ends up like Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson was always this kind of guy who was a supremely physical specimen who fought really stupid and never developed nuance and structure. And I get that Charles kind of seems like that because he always gets hit really hard because of his vision. But there is actually pretty good nuance and structure to him. He just kind of has to. I really do believe that it's just he can't range find with his eyes. He has to do it tactilely. And so that was a little bit harsh. And he cozied up to Dustin Poirier a little bit. Also roasted Gaethje a little bit, which honestly all fair. Like, I'm a big Gaethje fan, but like all fair criticisms. Betting odds, you've got Tsarukyan at -180 to -215. And Ismagulov at a +148 to +165. Seems about right. I just think that Ismagulov has a physical ceiling that Tsarukyan is above. That is all. Amir Albazi versus Alessandro Costa. I talked about this in the intro, that it was going to be Alex Perez. It was going to be Brendan Royval. By the way, Amir Albazi versus Brendan Royval. That's a hot fire fight. Albazi is a bit of a weird one for me because he's 3-0 in the UFC. He's convincingly won every fight. He's gone out there, and I personally rate Jose Torres, Shorty Torres, who beat him, as a pretty good fighter. So, like, To be honest, the results are great. The on-paper resume, fantastic. But then I go and watch the footage of him, and he's just so wooden and stiff as a striker, and his grappling is what I like to call big man grappling. Big guy grappling. Because he'll go out there and he'll just do things that realistically should not work with relative physical parity, which at flyweight tends to happen in lower weight classes. The physical parity tends to be much, much higher than it is at like 205 or middleweight or even 170, heavyweight certainly. But Albazi kind of like grapples in a manner that suggests he's in one of those four divisions. He'll go for strongman subs, things that just really shouldn't work without the ability to bully people, and they don't. But he hasn't had to pay for that yet. And for Costa, I like him. There's creativity to him. There's a very solid skill set. Although at times he will go very, very counter heavy. Which you can kind of see is we'll talk about it with Mental Cop later, but I also talked about it with Matheus Nicolau. Either for last week's card or the card before that. I think it was the card before that. It was the Matt Schnell Matheus Nicolau fight. And it's like you're leaving a lot of potential room for somebody to just pile up volume and activity and put you behind. That allows an opponent to just kind of set things up and sit on a lead where you increasingly have to take larger and larger risks to actually engage them. That's my concern with Costa. I don't think it's a big deal in this fight because Albazi goes out there and just will put it on. Like, there is no sitting on a lead. There is no fear of counters to Albazi. I think he's going to go out there and he's trying to put the grappling game on him. Costa's a perfectly fine grappler, but he's not an amazing grappler. He's not an amazing athlete. He's not these things that I really, really fear that Albazi is going to get run into. Because if you look at it, you know, I mean, I don't want to say he's beaten a guy like this because, to be honest, like Malcolm Gordon, Zhalga Ismagulov, Francisco Figueiredo, these are all not Costa. They're all flawed in a way that Costa isn't. Figueiredo's flawed in a sense of, well, Figueiredo is Albazi in the sense that like he wants to be Davidson Figueiredo, but he's Francisco Figueiredo, and he's trying to do the same things that Davidson does, and he's about as technically sound as Davidson is, but without the actual athleticness. He's the lesser athlete brother. Shumagulov has notable problems with pacing himself. And then Malcolm Gordon is just kind of really, really kind of terrible. I like Malcolm Gordon. I really do. I've been to the gym he trains out of. I've met him very briefly. See, he seems like a really cool dude, but he is at a UFC level for flyweight. Beating him is like not impressive so much as a prerequisite. But anyways, I'm picking Albazi by submission. Costa doesn't get submitted easily, but Albazi does make a habit of submitting people. And the odds are heavily in his favor. He is anywhere from a minus 400 to a minus 500 favorite. So I don't think I'm spitting any kind of hot fire here. Costa at 325 to 350. Plus that is. Might be worth looking at a bet if you're looking for a bet. If you're looking for like a big underdog to go in on. Just because this is the third opponent that Albazi's been preparing for. I don't really know if I want to trust anybody to the tune of like minus 400, minus 500 when they're dealing with a relatively good fighter on short notice. Alex Caceres, Julian Erosa. I have very little in the way of notes or anything to say on this. What this boils down to is that Alex Caceres is a guy I probably will very, very, very seldom pick because he is a fighter who will have the fight that his opponent wants to have with him almost by default. He refuses, even when he can, even when he should, to define a fight on him. He's the sort of guy who will willingly grapple with Kron Gracie, for example. And if you're going to let Erosa have his fight, which is a super scrappy and fun fight, don't get me wrong, this is going to be fun, but it's a scrappy fight that Erosa is built to win. He is built to throw a lot of volume. He is built to win decisions that way. He is built to go to the body in a way that Caceres doesn't really deal with all that well. And that's why I'm picking him. And it looks like everyone's kind of like sort of on that trip. I mean, not that Caceres is a massive underdog or anything, but he is plus 134 to plus 150 despite being the bigger name in the fight. And Eros is minus 165 to minus 177. I think he goes to decision because Caceres is super durable. I also noticed that the audio wave there got super low on those odds. Arosa minus 165, minus 177. That's the range you're looking at depending on who you're betting with. Drew Dober, Bobby Green. Bobby Green's my first underdog pick because he's plus 120 to plus 135. I get it. He's getting old. He did get absolutely destroyed by Islam Makhachev and is now claiming that he's been on steroids since he was 10. And Bobby Green did test positive for something from a tainted supplement. I don't remember the details, but he definitely found the supplement in question. And I don't think that there's any kind of long-termness here. But to me, this really reminds me a lot of the Haqparast fight that he did win in the form of Drew Dober, because Dober is a good striker. He's been good at coming from behind. The big knockout against Rafael Alves, despite starting kind of poorly. The big knockout against Terrence McKinney, despite getting absolutely worked. Knocking out Alexander Hernandez after falling behind. And of course, knocking out Nasrat Haqparast, which is a guy I'm comparing this to with Bobby Green. Bobby Green, though, is incredibly durable. He's still durable despite his age. He's still fast. He still has the prerequisite physical things that made him an incredibly difficult matchup for a long, long time. We're talking about a guy who has been featured in high-level MMA bouts since Affliction. Like that's something to consider. Like, this is a guy who made his Strikeforce debut 2011. 11 years ago. More than 11 years ago. And even before that, like I said, was on the Affliction 2 card back in 2009. This guy's been around for so long, and it's amazing how well he's aged and stayed in the game. He is a guy who it is very, very hard to hurt. Very, very hard to win against consistently in exchanges, which Dober needs to do. He is virtually impossible to out-wrestle. And Dober is not a particularly good wrestler anyways. I just see him taking what Dober has. And Dober will have his moments. Dober will throw big, big shots. Don't get me wrong. But at some point, Green's just going to kind of take over the fight. He's going to see what Dober has to offer and just be like, but I have a much deeper pool than you. I have all the depth in my technical boxing background. I have the slick movement. And it has recently seemed like he's less prone to what I like to call super close decision syndrome, where like he'll overvalue one moment of the fight and then suddenly and end up losing. Kind of like what George Masvidal had. And to be honest, it's kind of like what Drew Dober had until Drew Dober started actually knocking people out. But yeah, I'm going with Bobby Green, and it's a bit weird to see him at a plus 120 to plus 135. I think it's kind of disrespectful. Dober is a minus 150 to minus 165 favorite, so it's not super wide or anything. But I do kind of think it's a little disrespectful. Cody Brundage versus Michael Oleksiejczuk. I'm taking Oleksiejczuk. He's got the reach. He's got the volume. He's got the body snatching ability. He's got the anti-wrestling ability. I honestly think that at 185, this guy is a problem. He was a problem at 205, despite being way smaller than the dudes he was fighting. Now that he's like on semi-size parity, I have big expectations. Not like a championship expectations, but like that he's going to be a high-level action fighter for a couple years to come. And despite Brundage's great success, having won 2 fights in a row, I never thought that he would actually win anything, to be honest, after that Nick Maximoff fight, because it was terrible. But he's still kind of just like a good wrestler, not super athletic, and not super diverse as a striker. And yeah, no, I have to take Oleksiejczuk. I'm going to say by decision because Brundage is super tough. He's got that workman's pail. He's taking that lunchbox to work, and he is going to take a lot of beatings, a lot of hurt sandwiches. Oleksiejczuk minus 275 to minus 295 favorite, plus 210 to plus 240 for Brundage. Wider than I expected, because I've always thought that Oleksiejczuk was like a pocket pick of mine. Maybe that's not the case. Cheyenne Velismus versus Corey McKenna. Despite being the same height, Velismus will have 4.5 inches of reach. And of course, I'm not going to bother explaining this. Cheyenne Velismus was Cheyenne Bays. She's Cheyenne Velismus again. And that kind of makes her old fights a little bit disjointed, searching for her fights, to be honest. Cheyenne Velismus fits the mold of a dumb jock fighter. And what I mean by that is all the physical talent is there. Fast, strong, powerful, coordinated. No physical ceiling that is like horrendously apparent. And there will be moments of brilliance where her footwork looks immaculate. That she'll cut like an angle perfectly, high level, and you're like, this girl could be a championship contender. And then you have the dumb moments. Number one, she seems to like to actually talk shit and be a bully, which did not work against, for example, Montserrat Caneo, and actually had moments of the Mallory Martin fight where Martin started getting into the fight because she was focusing more on the Gab war than the actual war. And her footwork gets incredibly sloppy. She'll back right into the cage. She'll allow for takedowns. She'll allow the game to get away from her against people that it shouldn't. Like beating Montserrat Conejo is something she should have done. I picked her to do that, and instead she just kind of kept running into the same problem. So she's my most infuriating type of fighter, which is you have all the physical check marks and you still find a way to periodically suck. I'm still picking her here because McKenna, I think, is hard physically limited. She's just not a high-level athlete. She has a super limited reach. I think she's come to pace with the idea that she has to be a pressure fighter, that she has to mix in a wrestling game, that she has to become kind of a team alpha male fighter. And she showed against Miranda Granger. But Granger is notably not athletic, not particularly deep, not particularly functional as a fighter. Velismus is a big step up from that. I'm picking Velismus by decision just because McKenna has been very, very hard to finish. Betting odds, surprised that this one is as close as it is, minus 166 to minus 210 for Velismus, plus 152 to plus 170 for McKenna. It's closer than the Oleksiejczuk fight, which to me is a little bit weird. Like I said, like I kind of appreciate the love coming in on Oleksiejczuk, but it's ruining one of my old betting plans. Jake Matthews against Matt Semmelsberger. Semmelsberger, the bigger guy. He's 2 inches taller, 3 inches longer. I was really, really high on Jake Matthews. It looked like he was really putting something together against Andre Fiallo. And then Fiallo kind of looked really bad against Muslim Salikov. So maybe I need to pump the brakes there. I still think this is an incredibly winnable fight for him. Matthews has fast hands. He's actually a pretty good grappler, reasonably creative, throws in combination, has good mastery of range. Like his footwork is good. His ability to gauge timing and range is solid. He'll find counters, which is really nice. Semmelsberger is very, very open to counters. Like Alex Morono made that abundantly clear. Semmelsberger has large physicality, but I view him as kind of like this super blunt weapon where like lots of power, lots of explosiveness, dangerous at all times, but neutralizable in exchanges with good speed, footwork, and a healthy dose of counters. Matthews can do that. Picking Matthews by decision Semmelsberger is stunningly durable. I've seen this guy eat huge shots and keep coming. So that's why I can't pick him to get finished. But it wouldn't surprise me in any way. Matthews is a minus 260 to minus 275 favorite. Semmelsberger coming in at plus 240 to plus 230. So, interesting stuff. Julian Marquez, Darren Wynn. Darren Wynn's kind of, again, a guy who I just can't really pick. You're 8 inches shorter, although only 2 inches in reach shorter than Marquez. He's just too small. I would like his skills on a taller guy. Like, he is actually a pretty good wrestler, pretty tough. Throws some good punches, but it's just so short and stubby arms. And I mean, there's a chance he could win because Marquez fights with no real regard for what an opponent does. Although this is his first fight outside of the James Krause environment, so I don't know, maybe we'll see major changes. I think he went to Extreme Couture. Could be wrong on that. What gym is Julian Marquez at right now? It's not listed on Tapology. Is it listed elsewhere? Maybe? Because that I guess would be the big question is, where did he go? Syndicate MMA was his home before going to Glory. He went to Glory, then he went to Syndicate, then he went to Glory. I assume he's back with Syndicate. And they might be able to work some things into him, but they couldn't do it before. So I guess there's no reason to assume that he is going to be anything other than a wild man who takes massive risks, and Wynn might be able to make him pay for it. But I do have to pick him here by TKO. Wynn's starting to run out of physical durability. I think he's also starting to find fighting miserable, and that's not a good recipe for beating Julian Marquez. So TKO, Julian Marquez, he's a minus 165 to minus 180 favorite. Wynn is plus 138 to plus 150. It's interesting to see Wynn a lesser underdog than Semmelsberger, than McKenna, and really almost everyone on the card. Anyways. So moving on to Said Nurmagomedov versus Saud Kakramanov. This is a really surprising, even fight because despite not being related to Khabib in any close way, I suppose the same last name probably could be somewhere in the family tree, way, way off, but not a brother, not a cousin, It's sort of like if I meet a person named Magus who I have no idea who they are, maybe there's some kind of relation there. But he is not related, but he is kind of, you would think that the last name would grant him something. It tends to, yet he's only a minus 103 to 120 fighter, and Kakramanov is minus 105 to minus 117. So you can find Nurmagomedov at quote-unquote underdog odds here, although admittedly still minus. And it's a bit weird because Kakramanov has not really proven much. Don't get me wrong, I want to say nice things about him. He's a good wrestler, he's good physically, I'm going to pick him a lot, but his biggest win of his career is Ronnie Lawrence and Trevin Jones. And for comparison purposes, Said Nurmagomedov, despite my thoughts on his limitations of his creative kick-first striking style, has still beaten Douglas Da Silva, Ricardo Ramos, Cody Stamann, Justin Scoggins. These are actually really good fighters. High-level physicality, not so much on Stamann's part, and well put together games, not so much on Scoggins' part. That definitely suggests that this guy is really good. This guy is a feature of the bantamweight division moving forward. And I'm picking him to beat Kakramanov because Kakramanov going to come out with a style that Nurmagomedov has definitely seen before, that he has grown up seeing, which is the pressure wrestler boxer. He's got good abilities to find range. He's got good creative striking. And he's hard to take down. He's hard to take. Like I don't want to over like say the Dagestani Dagestani equals something because Shambhala Shambalaya, for example, was a Dagestani fighter who actually had really deficient wrestling. But Nurmagomedov lives up to the stereotype of the region, even if he is not the trademark fighter, even if he is not the trademark Habib style fighter. He's more of a Zabit Magomed Sharapov type of fighter. And I've got him winning this fight by decision. Mahashete versus Rafa Garcia. This is another one where I'm a little bit surprised that Mahashete is an underdog, plus 100 to plus 118. Garcia minus 125 to minus 140. I like Rafa Garcia. He's scrappy as hell. He's well-rounded. He'll be problem-solving on the fly. He'll be looking for openings. He does everything I like to see. But Mahashete is a monster. There are holes in the monster's game. There are limitations of him technically. There's a shallowness to his game that somebody is going to exploit. And it won't be too much above Rafa Garcia, if I'm being honest. But he hits exceptionally hard. He wrestles exceptionally hard. He is himself pretty tough. And he has a certain fearlessness to him that even though Rafa Garcia is going to throw a lot of toughness at him, a lot of chaotic questions, shifting the dynamics to try to find a weakness, until I see something that Mahashete is just vulnerable to on that, I'm not picking him to lose. And yeah, that's why I have Mahashete by decision. Also picking Rinat Fakhretdinov by decision. He's a minus 145 to minus 155 favorite against Brian Battle, plus 113 to plus 130. I like Brian Battle. I actually really, really do like Brian Battle. Seems like a cool dude, creative striker, can wrestle, can grapple, has sort of that kind of hard-nosed, not a great athlete, but not a terrible athlete, well-roundedness that is going to test some people, but Fakhretdinov should probably just be able to pressure him. Like, he has really, really good pressure footwork. He has really good pressure boxing. It's very, very shallow. Like, if you get Fakhretdinov into longer combinations, gaps will come. And, like, if Battle can stuff a couple takedowns and force some longer striking combinations on him, he's going to eat him up. But Fakhretdinov has good enough boxing to implement the wrestling game because you got to respect the boxing game. And then he's on you with the wrestling game. He doesn't have the greatest of control, but like he just stays on you, keeps chain wrestling. He is Mr. Mat Return. And watching that fight with Andreas Michailidis, who is a monster at welterweight, does suggest that this guy actually has a lot of promise. And by the way, Michailidis was cheating like the entire time with grabbing the cage. The grip strength, the motor, the technical wrestling, the Oleg Taktarov, seal of approval. I'm taking Rinat Fakhretdinov. David Dvorak versus Mano Kopp. Weird location for this fight because, flyweight is an infinitely shallow division. And to be honest, why not just put Mano Kopp in there with Amir Albazi? Like, that has the sort of kind of like actual cachet to it that would draw eyeballs. Kopp is a frustrating fighter. He's dynamic. He's creative. He'll show it every so often. He's got an incredibly high physical ceiling. But he's also really willing to just get outputted and be incredibly restrained, incredibly counter-dedicated. But here's the thing. That worked for Matthias Nicolau against David Dvorak. Nicolau was able to hurt Dvorak a couple of times. He was able to counter him very effectively. He was able to utilize good footwork to stay away. Now, Kopp does not have the same level of footwork. It was shown when they fought Nicolau and Kopp. Which, by the way, whoever thought that fight was a good idea during the midst of Kopp Mania when they first signed him needs to get their head examined. Because that was always going to be kind of a crappy fight. And it was. Kopp is more dangerous than Nicolau in a dynamic sense, in a hurting you off of one strike sense. And I think the option's there for Dvorak, who kind of really just has following footwork. Like, there's not cage cutting off footwork. He just the door is always open to keep escaping from him. And he's going to get hurt at some point. Going to get finished at some point. Manel Kape by TKO. Sergey Morozov versus Journey Newsom opens the card up. I like Newsom. He's a fun BJJ guy with creative striking, pretty reasonable physicality, but his wins are aging very poorly, as are his losses. This is a guy who it was kind of like, hey, you beat Fernie Garcia. That's kind of cool. You look really good doing it. And then Fernie Garcia goes out and just makes terrible decisions against Brady Easton, who I still think is a terrible, terrible fighter. Also, Fernie Garcia's knockout of Joshua Weems is aging poorly. The loss to Randy Costa, who didn't last very long. The loss to, was it a loss or to Domingo Pilarte? Did he lose to Pilarte? I'm trying to remember this now. Domingo Pilarte. It ended up getting rolled a no contest. No, he won that fight. Right. And then tested positive for marijuana. So the positive test isn't really a problem, but like Domingo Pilarte after that just kind of got bullied by like Brian Kelleher. And any hype he had off of the Klarsh fight kind of died. And even Ricardo Ramos has been kind of hit and miss. Beat Donnie Chavez lately. Beat Bill Algeo, but lost to Kugov. Beat Gargori, lost to Lerone Murphy. Lost to Saeed Nurmagomedov before that fight. And his win over Kwaiko Kang is aging quite poorly. Anyways, what I'm getting at here is that I'm kind of having to estimate my thoughts on Newsom downwards and Morozov upwards. I thought when the UFC signed Morozov that he wouldn't be long for this promotion. And the reason essentially was going to be that he fought with a high athlete bully game without actually having the high grade physicality. My thought was that was going to bite him and bite him violently. It really hasn't. It really, really hasn't. He's lost. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's not like Morozov's been on like a horrendous tear or anything. Losing to Douglas De Silva de Andrade, losing to Umar Nurmagomedov. But like at the same time, beating Raulian Paiva, beating Khalid Taha. Particularly the Paiva fight, like it kind of showed that like there's maybe more physicality than I thought he had. And there's a deeper well of technicality to him and hard-nosedness and persistence that I think will actually get him some things. So I'm going with Morozov by decision, partially because I'm kind of like off the Newsom hype train, and partially because I'm not on the Morozov hype train, but I'm getting off the hating on him sort of thing. Not necessarily hating on him. The question marks I have about him are clearing up a little bit. So Morozov is a minus 275 to minus 300 favorite. That is too wide. If I were to give betting advice here, and you're going to bet, and you have the money to lose, underdog Journey Newsom at 210 to 242, that's worth a look. Because Morozov is not that comfortable pick. But he probably will win this fight. That's the fight card. Check below, check to the left, check to the right, check above, somewhere, depending on where you are listening to this podcast right now. You will find a link to Discord. You will find a link tree which will take you to a link to the Discord, as well as my YouTube channels, various sources of the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, etc. I highly recommend joining the Discord. I really do. I think it's a fantastic, we got a fantastic little simulated world going with pro wrestling, mixed martial arts, and slam ball. Slam ball games are going to be run today, so feel free to check it out. And on that note, I am out. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I hope your picks go well. I hope your bets go well. Although, given all of the problems lately, I would stay away from betting. I always had that stance. Only bet what you can lose.